The key wouldn't turn. My daughter Sarah stood there on the doorstep of what used to be my house, jiggling that brass key over and over again. Her husband Mike was right behind her, both of them still wearing their fancy business clothes from their trip to Chicago. They'd been gone for 2 weeks, and oh, what a 2 weeks it had been. Sarah's face went from confused to worried to downright panicked as she kept trying that key. "Mike, something's wrong," she said, her voice getting higher. "The key isn't working." That's when Mike noticed the white envelope taped to the door. His name was written on it in my careful handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed his birthday cards for 15 years, the same handwriting that had written grocery lists and love notes when I still lived in this house. He tore open that envelope, and I could see his eyes moving back and forth as he read. Sarah was looking over his shoulder, and I watched from across the street as both their faces changed completely. First confusion, then shock, then something that looked like pure terror. "No," Sarah whispered, but I could hear her from where I stood. "No, no, no. This can't be happening." Mike crumpled up that letter and threw it on the ground, then picked it up again and smoothed it out. He read it twice more before Sarah started screaming. "But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to know how we got here. How a sweet grandmother like me ended up watching her own daughter and son-in-law discover that their perfect little plan had backfired in the worst possible way." Comment below, as I'd love to hear your thought, and subscribe to the channel to help us hit that big 5,000 subscriber milestone. We're so close, and every single one counts. It's free for you, but it means everything to this channel. And hey, while you're at it, I've left a video and also a link to a playlist on the final screen that I promise will surprise you. Seriously, don't miss them. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Now go hit that button and be part of the journey. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Dorothy and I'm 73 years old. I raised 3 children mostly by myself after my husband passed when they were young. Sarah was my middle child, and she'd always been the one who worried about everything. Even as a little girl, she'd fret about having enough money for college, about what would happen when I got old, about whether she'd be successful enough. I thought those worries would go away when she married Mike. He had a good job at the bank, and they seemed happy together in their big house across town. They never had children, which made me a little sad, but I figured they knew what was best for their lives. For the past 5 years, I'd been living in the house where I raised all my kids. It's a beautiful place, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, with a big backyard where I grew tomatoes and roses. The neighborhood was quiet and safe, full of families I'd known for decades. Mrs. Peterson next door had been my friend since 1987. The Johnsons across the street always helped me with my groceries. But as I got older, Sarah started visiting more often. At first, I was happy about it. We'd sit in my kitchen drinking coffee, and she'd tell me about her work at the insurance company. Mike would fix little things around the house, a leaky faucet here, a squeaky door there. Then the conversation started changing. "Mom, this house is getting too big for you," Sarah would say, looking around my living room like she was seeing problems I couldn't see. "I managed just fine," I'd tell her. And I did. Sure, I moved a little slower than I used to, and sometimes I forgot where I put my reading glasses, but I was still sharp. I still drove to the grocery store, still did my own laundry, still cooked my own meals. "But what if something happens?" she'd ask. "What if you fall down those stairs? What if you have a medical emergency and nobody's here to help?" I'd remind her that I had my medical alert button, that Mrs. Peterson checked on me every day, that my other children, Robert in California and Linda in Florida, called me twice a week. But Sarah always had another worry ready. The conversations got more frequent. Every time she visited, she'd bring up the house, how it needed a new roof, how the furnace was old, how the property taxes kept going up. "You know, Mom, there are some really nice senior living places around here," she said one afternoon, pulling out a bunch of colorful brochures. "Look at this one, Sunset Manor. They have activities every day, 3 meals included, and a nurse on staff 24 hours." I flipped through those brochures to be polite, but I wasn't interested. The places looked fine, I suppose, but they weren't home. They were full of strangers, with tiny rooms and shared dining halls. I'd spent 50 years making my house into a home. Every room had memories. The kitchen where I'd taught all 3 kids to cook, the living room where we'd opened Christmas presents, the backyard where I'd pushed them on the swing set. "I'm not ready for that," I told her. "Maybe someday, but not now." Sarah's face got that tight look it used to get when she was a teenager and didn't get her way. "Mom, you're being stubborn. You need to think practically about this." But I was thinking practically. I had enough money saved up to pay for help if I needed it. I had friends nearby. I had a life in that neighborhood. The visits kept coming, and the pressure kept building. Sometimes Mike would come along, and he'd point out everything that needed fixing in the house. The windows were old, he'd say. The electrical system needed updating. The driveway had cracks. "It's going to cost a fortune to maintain this place," he'd tell Sarah, loud enough for me to hear. "And for what? She rattles around in here all by herself." I started dreading their visits. Every conversation felt like an ambush, with both of them tag-teaming me about why I needed to sell the house and move somewhere more appropriate for someone my age. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March. Sarah had called that morning to say she'd be stopping by after work to bring me some groceries. I was grateful. My arthritis had been acting up, and carrying heavy bags was getting harder. She arrived around 5:30 with 2 bags from the supermarket and that familiar, worried expression on her face. We put the groceries away together, and then she made us both some tea. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important," she said, settling into the chair across from me at my kitchen table. I knew what was coming. Another conversation about the house, about senior living, about how I needed to be realistic about my future. "Mike and I have been talking," she began, "and we think it's time to seriously consider your options." "Sarah, honey, we've been over this." She held up her hand to stop me. "Just hear me out, please. We've been looking at the real estate market, and houses in this neighborhood are selling really well right now. Your house could probably get $850,000, maybe even $900,000. I nearly choked on my tea. I knew the house was worth a good amount. The neighborhood had gotten more desirable over the years, and several houses on my street had sold for impressive prices. But hearing that number out loud was shocking. "That's a lot of money, Mom," Sarah continued. "More than enough to pay for a really nice place at Sunset Manor, with plenty left over for your medical expenses and anything else you might need." "But I don't want to sell," I said. Like I'd said 100 times before, Sarah's voice got that patient tone that made me feel like a difficult child. "I know change is scary, but you have to think about what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated. "Or what's best for you and Mike?" Her face flushed red. "That's not fair, Mom. We're worried about you." "Are you? Or are you worried about being stuck taking care of me if something happens?" The kitchen got very quiet. Sarah stared down at her teacup, and I could tell I'd hit close to something true. "It's not about that," she said finally. "It's about making sure you're safe and taken care of." But I could see it in her eyes. She was thinking about the burden I might become, about the responsibility she'd have if I got sick or hurt. She was thinking about her own life, her own plans, and how an aging mother might complicate things. We finished our tea in uncomfortable silence, and she left earlier than usual. I spent the rest of the evening feeling unsettled, like something had shifted between us that couldn't be shifted back. Over the next few weeks, the visits became more intense. Sarah would show up with real estate listings, with brochures for senior communities, with stories about other elderly people who'd made the transition and were so much happier. She started bringing Mike along more often, and I began to notice how they'd exchange looks when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Little glances and nods, like they were having conversations I wasn't part of. One evening in April, they were both in my living room going through a stack of papers. Sarah was showing me floor plans for different apartment layouts at various senior places, while Mike was looking at something on his tablet. "This one's really nice, Mom," Sarah was saying, pointing to a drawing of a one-bedroom apartment. "It has a little kitchenette, so you could still do some cooking if you wanted to, but you wouldn't have to worry about all the upkeep." I was only half listening because I'd heard variations of this speech so many times. But then Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at it and said, "Oh, it's Jessica from work. I should take this. We're working on that big project together." She walked into the kitchen to answer. Mike was still focused on his tablet, scrolling through what looked like real estate websites. I was pretending to study the floor plans when I heard Sarah's voice from the kitchen. She must have thought she was speaking quietly, but voices carry in that house. I heard her say, "Yeah, the plan is still on track. We should have this wrapped up in the next month or two." There was a pause, then, "He has to go to a nursing home. There's really no other choice." My blood went cold. She was talking about me like I was already gone, like my opinion didn't matter. I sat there frozen, listening to her continue the conversation. "The house is worth way more than we thought. Mike thinks we can get at least $890 for it, maybe more if we're lucky." Another pause. "No, she's being difficult about it, but she'll come around. She doesn't really have a choice." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. This wasn't about my safety or my well-being. This was about money. This was about getting me out of the way so they could sell my house. But the worst part was still coming. Once we get her moved out and sell the place, Mike and I will finally be able to afford that condo we've been looking at. The one downtown with the view of the river. We've been wanting to upgrade for years, and this will make it possible. I didn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. I just sat there in my living room staring at those floor plans while my daughter planned my future like I was a piece of furniture to be moved around. Sarah came back into the room a few minutes later, smiling like nothing had happened. "Sorry about that. Work calls, you know?" I nodded and mumbled something about being tired. They left soon after, but not before Sarah hugged me and said, "Maitim, think about what we talked about tonight, okay? We really do want what's best for you." After they were gone, I sat in my quiet house and tried to process what I'd heard. My own daughter, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, the teenager I'd helped with homework, the young woman I'd supported through college, was plotting to get rid of me so she could upgrade her lifestyle. I felt betrayed in a way I'd never experienced before, not just disappointed or hurt, but truly betrayed by someone I'd trusted completely. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Sarah's voice on that phone call. How casual she'd sounded when she said he has to go to a nursing home. Like I was just an obstacle to be cleared away. But along with the hurt, something else was growing inside me. Something that surprised me with its intensity. I was getting angry. By morning, I'd made a decision. If Sarah and Mike thought they could manipulate me and plan my life behind my back, they were about to learn that this old lady wasn't as helpless as they assumed. I spent the next 2 weeks watching them carefully. Every visit, every conversation, every helpful suggestion about senior living. I saw it all through new eyes. They were working together, wearing me down, waiting for me to give in. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd forgotten that phone call, forgotten that I'd heard everything. They had no idea that I knew exactly what they were planning. And that's when I started planning something of my own. I called my lawyer, Harold Martinez, who'd been handling my affairs for 20 years. I told him I needed to make some changes to my will and that I wanted to explore some options for my house. "What kind of options, Dorothy?" he asked. "The kind that are going to teach some people a very important lesson about respect and honesty." I said. Harold chuckled. He'd known me long enough to recognize when I was serious. All right, let's talk. What do you have in mind? Over the next week, Harold and I worked out a plan that was both perfectly legal and absolutely devastating. It would require precise timing and complete secrecy, but if it worked, Sarah and Mike were going to get the shock of their lives. The final piece fell into place when Sarah called to tell me about their upcoming business trip to Chicago. They'd be gone for 2 weeks, she said, and she wanted to make sure I'd be okay by myself. Don't worry about me, I told her, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. I'll be just fine. 2 weeks would be perfect. More than enough time to put my plan into action. The morning after they left for Chicago, I called Harold. It's time, I said. Are you absolutely sure about this, Dorothy? He asked. Once we do this, there's no going back. I thought about Sarah's voice on that phone call, about the way she'd talked about me like I was already dead, about how she'd planned to spend the money from selling my house. I'm sure, I said. Let's do it. What happened next would change everything. By the time Sarah and Mike returned from their business trip, smiling and relaxed and ready to continue pressuring me about the house, they were going to discover that their sweet, naive old mother had been several steps ahead of them all along. The key wouldn't work because it wasn't their house anymore. And the note I'd left them was going to explain exactly why their comfortable little world had just collapsed around them. But that's where their screaming started, and where my real revenge began. The screaming went on for what felt like forever. Sarah was clutching that letter so tight, her knuckles had gone white, and Mike kept running his hands through his hair like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. I stayed hidden across the street behind Mrs. Peterson's rose bushes, watching it all unfold, exactly like I'd planned. This can't be legal, Mike shouted, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. She can't just do this! Sarah was crying now, those big ugly sobs that made her whole body shake. She kept reading the letter over and over, like the words might change if she looked at them enough times. The letter was simple and to the point. I'd written it in my clearest handwriting, the kind I used for important documents. Dear Sarah and Mike, by the time you read this, the house has been sold. The new owners will be moving in tomorrow morning. I heard your phone conversation about putting me in a nursing home and selling my house to buy yourselves a fancy condo. Since you were so eager to get rid of the house anyway, I decided to help you out. The money from the sale is going somewhere. It can do some real good in this world. You might want to try knocking on doors in your old neighborhood. I'm sure someone will let you sleep on their couch tonight. Love always, but not blindly. Mom. I'd spent hours perfecting that letter, making sure every word hit exactly where it needed to. The part about the money going somewhere to do good, that was the knife twist I was most proud of. They'd be wondering about that for a long time. Mrs. Peterson appeared at her front door, pretending to water her plants, but obviously curious about all the commotion. She'd been my partner in this whole operation, though she didn't know all the details. Sweet Gladys Peterson, my friend for 37 years, had been happy to help when I told her I needed to teach my ungrateful daughter a lesson. "What's all that shouting about?" she called out, playing her part perfectly. Sarah looked up from the letter, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "Mrs. Peterson, do you know what happened to my mother? Do you know where she is?" Gladys shrugged. "Oh, Dorothy moved out about a week ago. Sold the house to some lovely young family. The Hendersons, I think their name was. They have 2 little girls." Mike stepped forward, still holding his suitcase. "Moved out? Where did she go?" "Well, I'm not really sure," Gladys said, still watering those same 3 plants. "She mentioned something about wanting a fresh start somewhere new. Said she was tired of people trying to run her life." That last part wasn't in our script, but Gladys added it with perfect timing. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Sarah crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it on the ground, then immediately picked it up and smoothed it out again. "There has to be some mistake. She wouldn't just sell the house without telling us. She couldn't even manage her own checkbook last month. Oh, but I manage it just fine. That was another little lie Sarah had been telling people. That poor old Dorothy was getting confused about money, that she needed help with her finances. The truth was, I'd been managing my money perfectly well, and I'd been managing a lot more of it than Sarah realized. Mike pulled out his phone and started dialing. I'm calling Harold Martinez. There's no way this is legal. We'll contest it, we'll sue, we'll do whatever we have to do. I almost felt sorry for Harold. He was going to be getting a lot of angry phone calls over the next few days. But he knew what he was getting into when he helped me plan this whole thing. Harold, it's Mike Sullivan, Mike said when the call connected. We need to talk right now. Dorothy's done something completely insane, and we need to know our legal options. I couldn't hear Harold's side of the conversation, but I could imagine it. He'd be very calm and professional, explaining that everything had been done properly, that all the paperwork was in order, that Dorothy Martinez had been of completely sound mind when she made her decisions. Mike's face got redder and redder as the conversation went on. What do you mean she had the right? It's been her house for 50 years. She can't just... Harold, you have to understand, she's not thinking clearly. She's old, she's confused, Sarah grabbed the phone from him. Harold, this is Sarah. You've known me since I was little. You know my mother isn't capable of making decisions like this anymore. There has to be something we can do. But Harold had known me a lot longer than he'd known Sarah, and he knew exactly how capable I was. We'd spent hours going over every detail of this plan, making sure everything was legal and binding and completely irreversible. Sarah listened for a while, her face falling more and more with each word. Finally, she hung up and handed the phone back to Mike. What did he say? Mike asked. He said, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He said everything was done legally. The sale was final a week ago. The money has already been transferred. Transferred where? He wouldn't tell me, said it was confidential. Mike kicked at a small rock on the sidewalk. This is insane. Your mother has lost her mind. But I hadn't lost my mind. For the first time in months, my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I finally understood what my daughter really thought of me, what she really wanted from me, and I'd acted accordingly. The Hendersons were supposed to arrive tomorrow morning with the moving truck, just like I'd told Sarah in the letter. They were a young couple with 2 daughters, ages 6 and 8. When I'd met them at the open house, I'd watched those little girls run around the backyard, imagining their mother pushing them on the same swings where I'd pushed my own children. That's when I knew they were the right family for the house. Not because they'd offered the most money, though their offer was very good, but because they'd love the house the way it deserved to be loved. They'd make new memories in those rooms, and those little girls would grow up safe and happy in the same place where I'd raised Sarah and Robert and Linda. The sale had gone through quickly, once I'd accepted their offer. Cash buyers, no chain, no complications. Harold had handled all the paperwork while Sarah and Mike were in Chicago, completely unaware that their inheritance was disappearing. Not that it had ever really been their inheritance. The house was mine to do with as I pleased, and it pleased me to make sure it went to people who'd appreciate it. Now Sarah and Mike were standing on the sidewalk with their suitcases, looking lost and confused. Their comfortable assumptions about the future had just blown up in their faces. Where are we going to stay tonight? Sarah asked. Mike looked around the neighborhood like he was seeing it for the first time. I don't know. A hotel, I guess. With what money? We spent everything we had on this trip. We were counting on... She stopped herself, but I knew what she'd been about to say. They'd been counting on my money, on the sale of my house to fund their new lifestyle. We'll figure something out, Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. Sarah sat down on the front steps, my old front steps that weren't mine anymore, and put her head in her hands. How did this happen? How did we not see this coming? Because you thought I was a helpless old lady who'd do whatever you told me to do, I thought. Because you thought you were so much smarter than me, so much better at planning and managing and making decisions. Mike sat down next to her. Maybe we should try calling your brothers. And tell them what? That Mom sold the house out from under us? That we've been planning to put her in a nursing home? Sarah shook her head. Robert and Linda always thought I was too controlling. They'll probably think this is hilarious. They would think it was hilarious, and they'd be right. Robert and Linda had always understood that I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. They called regularly, sent birthday cards, visited when they could. But they never tried to manage my life or make decisions for me. If Sarah had been more like her siblings, none of this would have happened. But Sarah had always been the worrier, the controller, the one who thought she knew best for everyone around her. The sun was starting to set, and the neighborhood was getting quiet. A few cars had driven by, their occupants slowing down to stare at the couple sitting on the steps with their suitcases. This was a peaceful neighborhood where dramatic scenes didn't usually play out on people's front lawns. We should probably find a hotel, Mike said again. Sarah nodded and stood up slowly. Like her whole body was sore. I just don't understand how she did this. Where did she even go? Harold wouldn't tell me anything. That was because Harold and I had planned for this exact moment. We'd discussed every possible question Sarah might ask, every angle she might try to pursue. Harold's job was to be professional and helpful while revealing absolutely nothing about my whereabouts or my plans. Mike pulled out his phone again. I'll call around to some hotels. Maybe there's something not too expensive. While he made calls, Sarah picked up the crumpled letter and read it one more time. I could see her lips moving as she read the part about the money going somewhere to do good in the world. She had no idea how good. The money from the sale of the house, all $890,000 of it, hadn't just disappeared into thin air. It had gone to 3 very specific places, each chosen carefully to make a point. The first chunk, $300,000, had gone to the American Cancer Society. My husband had died of cancer 30 years ago, and I'd always wanted to make a major donation in his memory. Now seemed like the perfect time. The second chunk, another $300,000, had gone to a scholarship fund for underprivileged students at the local community college. Too many young people couldn't afford education these days, and I remembered what it was like to struggle financially when my children were young. The remaining money had been split between the local food bank, the animal shelter, and a foundation that provided medical equipment to people who couldn't afford it. Every penny of that money was going to help people who actually needed help, instead of funding Sarah and Mike's upgrade to a fancy riverside condo. But they'd find out about all that later. For now, they just knew the money was gone and they had nowhere to sleep tonight. Mike finished his phone calls. Okay, I found a place. It's not great, but it's what we can afford. The roadside inn out by the highway. Sarah made a face. That place? I drove by it once and it looked like a dump. Well, it's what we've got, Mike said, unless you want to call one of your friends and ask if we can sleep on their couch. Sarah considered this, then shook her head. Not tonight. I need time to think about what we're going to tell people. They picked up their suitcases and started walking toward their car, which was parked at the end of the street. I watched from behind the rose bushes as they loaded their luggage and drove away, probably heading to spend an uncomfortable night at the cheapest motel in town. Part of me felt a tiny bit guilty watching my daughter drive away, looking so lost and confused. But then I remembered her voice on that phone call, the casual way she'd talked about putting me in a nursing home, and the guilt disappeared. This was a lesson she needed to learn, and sometimes the most important lessons are the hardest ones. After their car disappeared around the corner, I came out from my hiding spot. Mrs. Peterson was waiting for me with a cup of coffee and a big smile. "Well," she said, "I think that went perfectly." I took the coffee gratefully. "Thanks for playing along, Gladys. I couldn't have done it without you." "Are you kidding? This was the most excitement I've had in years. Did you see Sarah's face when she read that letter? I thought she was going to faint." We stood in her front yard, looking across the street at the house that had been my home for 50 years. Tomorrow morning, the Henderson family would move in with their little girls and their big dreams, and the house would start a new chapter of its life. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Gladys asked. "It's a big change." I nodded. "I'm ready. More ready than I've been for anything in a long time." Because that was the part of the plan that Sarah and Mike didn't know about yet, the part that would really shock them when they found out. I hadn't just sold the house and disappeared into thin air. I hadn't moved to some senior community in another state where they'd never find me. I'd moved exactly 4 blocks away, to a beautiful little cottage that I'd bought with my savings. A place with a garden and a front porch, and enough room for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But I wasn't going to tell them that yet. Let them wonder where I was for a while. Let them worry about whether I was safe, whether I was okay, whether I'd made a terrible mistake. Let them experience what it felt like to have someone you care about just disappear from your life without warning. Tomorrow, after the Hendersons moved into my old house, I'd start phase 2 of my plan, the part where Sarah and Mike would discover that their troubles were just beginning. Because selling the house was only the first surprise I had in store for them. The second surprise was going to be even bigger. The next morning, I woke up in my new cottage feeling more energetic than I had in months. I made myself a pot of coffee and sat on my front porch, watching the neighborhood come to life. It was a quiet street lined with oak trees, and I could already tell I was going to love it here. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked the 4 blocks back to my old house to watch the Henderson family move in. I wanted to see their faces when they got their first real look at their new home. And I also wanted to be there in case Sarah and Mike showed up to cause trouble. The moving truck was already parked outside when I arrived. Tom and Lisa Henderson were directing the movers, while their 2 daughters, Emma and Sophie, ran around the front yard with excitement. Emma, the older one, had found a dandelion and was blowing the seeds into the wind while Sophie chased them. "Girls, stay out of the movers' way," Lisa called, but she was smiling. You could tell this was a happy family, the kind of family that would fill the house with laughter and love. That's when I saw Sarah's car turn the corner. She'd clearly been driving around the neighborhood, probably hoping this was all some kind of nightmare she'd wake up from. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing the same clothes from yesterday. Mike was in the passenger seat, and he looked just as rough. They parked across the street and got out slowly, staring at the moving truck like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Excuse me," Sarah called out to Tom Henderson. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." Tom looked up from the box he was carrying. "Mistake? I don't think so. We bought this house fair and square." Sarah walked closer, and I could see her hands shaking. "This is my mother's house. She's not well. She couldn't have sold it without our knowledge." Lisa Henderson joined her husband, instinctively moving to protect her family from whatever drama was unfolding. "I'm sorry, but we have all the proper paperwork. The sale was completely legal." "Where is she?" Sarah demanded. "Where is Dorothy Martinez? What did you people do to her?" "Sarah, calm down," Mike said, but his voice was tight with stress, too. Tom Henderson pulled out his phone. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but if you don't leave us alone, I'm calling the police." That's when Emma, the 6-year-old, tugged on her father's shirt. "Daddy? Who's the nice lady hiding behind that tree over there?" Everyone turned to look where Emma was pointing. I'd been trying to stay hidden behind the big maple tree on the corner, but apparently I wasn't as invisible as I thought. Sarah's eyes went wide when she saw me. "Mom? Mom?" I sighed and stepped out from behind the tree. There was no point hiding anymore, and part of me wanted to see Sarah's reaction when she realized I'd been watching the whole thing. "Hello, Sarah," I said calmly. "Mom, what is going on? What have you done?" Sarah started walking toward me, and I could see she was trying to decide whether to hug me or shake me. "I did exactly what I said in the letter. I sold the house." "But why? Why didn't you talk to us about it?" I looked her straight in the eye. "The same reason you didn't talk to me about putting me in a nursing home." Sarah's face went pale. Behind her, Mike was shifting from foot to foot like he wanted to run away from the whole conversation. "Mom, that's not... We weren't..." Sarah struggled to find words. "I heard you on the phone," I said. "I heard every word. About how I had to go to a nursing home, about how you were going to sell the house, and buy yourself a fancy condo with the money." The Henderson family was watching this whole scene like it was a soap opera. I felt bad that they were getting dragged into our family drama on their moving day, but they needed to understand that Sarah and Mike had no claim on this house. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, turning to Lisa, "I'm Dorothy Martinez, the previous owner. I want to apologize for the confusion. These are my daughter and son-in-law, and they're having trouble accepting that I sold the house without consulting them." Lisa relaxed a little. "Oh, you're Dorothy. The realtor told us so many wonderful things about you. Thank you for taking such good care of this place." "It was my pleasure. I know you and your family will love it here." Sarah stepped between us. "Mom, you can't just give away our inheritance." "Your inheritance?" I raised my eyebrows. "I wasn't aware that I was dead." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "What did you mean, Sarah? That the house belonged to you while I was still alive? That you had the right to decide when I should be moved out of it?" The movers were still carrying boxes and furniture, trying to pretend they weren't listening to every word of our argument. Little Emma and Sophie had stopped playing and were watching with wide eyes. Mike finally found his voice. "Dorothy, we were only thinking about your safety. That house was too big for you to manage alone." "Was it? Or were you thinking about the $890,000 you could get for it?" "That's not fair," Sarah said. "Yes, we talked about the financial aspects, but only because we wanted to make sure you'd have enough money for quality care." Quality care that I didn't need or want. "You're 73 years old. What if you'd fallen down those stairs? What if you'd had a heart attack and no one was there to help?" I'd heard these arguments so many times, but now they just made me angry. What if, Sarah, Mom? You can't live your whole life worrying about what might happen." "I was trying to be responsible. You were trying to be controlling, just like you've always been." Tom Henderson cleared his throat. Folks, maybe you could continue this conversation somewhere else? We've got a lot of work to do here." I nodded. "Of course. I'm sorry for the disruption." I turned to Sarah and Mike. "We need to talk, but not here. These people shouldn't have to deal with our family problems." Sarah looked around at the moving truck, the boxes, the Henderson family, settling into what used to be her inheritance. "Where are we supposed to go? You've taken everything from us." "I've taken what was mine to take, and we can talk at my new place." "Your new place?" Mike's voice cracked. "Where?" "Follow me," I said. I started walking down the street, and after a moment I heard their footsteps behind me. We walked in silence for 4 blocks, while Sarah and Mike tried to process what was happening. When we reached my cottage, Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. "You bought another house?" she said. "With my own money," I confirmed, unlocking the front door. It was a sweet little place, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a cozy kitchen, and a living room with big windows that let in plenty of light. I'd fallen in love with it the moment I saw it, and I'd bought it outright with money from my savings account. "I don't understand," Sarah said, looking around the living room. "If you could afford to buy this place, why did you need to sell the other house?" "I didn't need to sell it." I chose to sell it. Mike sat down heavily on my new couch. So where did all that money go? The money from the sale? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when they'd understand just how completely their plans had backfired. It went to charity, I said simply. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock ticking on my mantel. Charity, Sarah whispered. 300,000 to the American Cancer Society, in memory of your father. 300,000 to a scholarship fund for students who can't afford college. And the rest, split between the food bank, the animal shelter, and a medical equipment foundation. Sarah sat down next to Mike, her face completely white. You gave away almost $900,000? I donated it to causes that matter to me, causes that help people who actually need help. But that was our... Sarah started, then stopped herself. Your what? Your money? Your inheritance? Mike put his head in his hands. Dorothy, do you have any idea what you've done? We had plans. We had dreams. So did I said. I had dreams of living in my own home until I died, surrounded by my memories and my neighbors and my garden. I had dreams of being treated with respect by my own daughter. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I do respect you, Mom. No, you don't. If you respected me, you would have talked to me about your concerns instead of plotting behind my back. If you respected me, you would have asked what I wanted instead of deciding what was best for me. We were trying to help. You were trying to control my life so you could get what you wanted out of it. The truth was hanging in the air between us like a heavy curtain. We all knew what had really been happening, even if Sarah couldn't bring herself to admit it. Mike looked up at me with something that might have been desperation. Is there any way to reverse this? Any way to get the money back? From cancer research and college scholarships? From the food bank and the animal shelter? I shook my head. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, those donations are final. Sarah was crying quietly now, tears streaming down her face. What are we going to do? We can't afford the mortgage on our house without that extra money. We were counting on... She stopped again, but I finished the sentence for her. You were counting on my death. That's not true. Isn't it? You were counting on inheriting my house eventually. So you made plans based on money that wasn't yours yet. You bought things you couldn't afford, made commitments you couldn't keep, because you assumed I'd die soon enough to bail you out. The cottage got very quiet again. Outside, I could hear birds singing in the oak tree by my front window. We never wanted you to die, Sarah said finally. No, but you wanted me gone. Out of the house, out of the way, tucked safely into some institution where you wouldn't have to think about me except when you visited on holidays. Mike stood up and walked to the window. So what happens now? Where does this leave us? That depends on you, I said. You can keep being angry about what I've done, or you can try to understand why I did it. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm trying to understand, Mom, but I can't. How could you just give away all that money without even telling us? The same way you could plan to institutionalize me without telling me. That's different. How? Because we were thinking about what was best for you. And I was thinking about what was best for me. The difference is, it was my money to give away. Sarah looked around my new living room like she was seeing it for the first time. This place must have cost a fortune. How much of your savings did you spend on it? Enough, I said. But don't worry, I'm not going to be a burden to you. I can afford to live here comfortably for the rest of my life. But what if you get sick? What if you need expensive medical care? I have insurance. I have Medicare. I have enough savings left to handle emergencies. What if it's not enough? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised, who used to curl up in my lap for bedtime stories, who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. And I saw a stranger. Someone so focused on worst-case scenarios that she couldn't see the life that was happening right now. "Sarah," I said gently, "what if it is enough? What if I live here happily for 20 more years, then gardening and reading and having coffee with my neighbors? What if all your worrying is for nothing? But what if it's not? Then I'll deal with it when it happens, the same way I've been dealing with problems my whole life." She shook her head. "I can't just stop worrying about you. I'm not asking you to stop worrying. I'm asking you to stop trying to control my life because of your worries." Mike turned away from the window. "Dorothy, I think we all need some time to process this. Maybe we should go home and think about everything that's happened." I nodded. "That's probably a good idea." Sarah stood up slowly. "Mom, are you cutting us out of your life completely?" The question caught me off guard. For all my anger, for all my hurt over what they'd planned, Sarah was still my daughter. "No," I said. "But things are going to be different now. No more conversations about where I should live or how I should spend my money. No more treating me like I'm incompetent just because I'm old. What if we promise to do better? Then we'll see." They left a few minutes later, and I watched from my front window as they walked back toward their car. They moved slowly, like they were carrying heavy weights. I felt sad watching them go, but I also felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. For the first time since Sarah had started pressuring me about the house, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. But as I made myself lunch in my new kitchen, I realized this was just the beginning. Sarah and Mike were going to have to face the consequences of their financial planning, and those consequences were going to be bigger than they realized, because there was one more surprise waiting for them, one final piece of my plan that they hadn't discovered yet. The surprise that would make them understand just how much they'd lost when they decided to treat me like a problem to be solved, instead of a person to be respected. 3 days passed before Sarah called me. 3 long days where I imagined her and Mike sitting in their house, trying to figure out how to salvage their financial plans. When my phone finally rang that Thursday morning, I almost didn't answer it. "Mom?" Sarah's voice sounded small and tired. "Can we talk?" "Of course we can talk. I mean really talk. Not fighting, not arguing. Just talk." I could hear something different in her voice. Not the controlling tone she'd been using for months, but something closer to the little girl who used to come to me when she was scared or confused. "Come over," I said. "I'll make some coffee." An hour later, Sarah was sitting at my new kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Mike's at work," she said, accepting the cup of coffee I offered her. "He doesn't know I'm here." "Why not?" "Because he's still too angry to think straight. He keeps talking about hiring lawyers, about finding ways to contest what you did." She took a sip of coffee and winced like it was too hot. "But I know there's no point. You had every right to sell your house and give away your money." I sat down across from her. "Yes, I did. I've been thinking about what you said, about how we treated you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected." Her voice got quiet. "You were right. This wasn't what I'd expected. I'd prepared myself for more anger, more accusations, maybe even threats, but not this quiet admission of guilt." "Sarah, no, let me finish. I need to say this." She looked up at me, and her eyes were red from crying. "I became so focused on what might happen to you that I forgot to pay attention to what was actually happening. You were fine. You were managing perfectly well, but I couldn't see that because I was too busy being scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you. Of not being a good enough daughter. Of having to watch you struggle and not knowing how to help." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "When Dad died, I was only 15. I watched you struggle so hard to keep everything together, to take care of us kids and pay the bills and hold our family together. I promised myself I'd never let you struggle like that again. I felt my own eyes getting watery. I hadn't expected this conversation to go in this direction. But honey, I wasn't struggling anymore. That was 30 years ago. I'm fine now. I know that. Logically, I know that. But emotionally, I was still that scared 15-year-old who wanted to protect her mother from everything bad that might happen. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for trying to control your life. I'm sorry for talking about you like you weren't there. I'm sorry for making plans without asking what you wanted. This was the conversation I'd been hoping we could have for months, but hearing it now didn't feel as satisfying as I'd imagined. Instead, I just felt sad that it had taken such drastic measures to get here. I forgive you, I said, but Sarah, you have to understand that your good intentions don't excuse what you were planning to do. I know, and I understand why you did what you did. You wanted to teach us a lesson. I wanted to show you what it felt like to have someone else make major decisions about your life without consulting you. Sarah nodded. Message received. Loud and clear. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking our coffee and listening to the birds outside my kitchen window. Can I ask you something? Sarah said finally. Of course. Do you really think we only cared about the money? I considered the question carefully. I think you convinced yourselves you were acting out of love, but yes, I think the money was a bigger factor than you want to admit. Sarah's face flushed. You're probably right. Mike and I have been struggling more than we let on. His job at the bank isn't as secure as it used to be, and my hours at the insurance company got cut last year. We've been using credit cards to maintain our lifestyle, and we were counting on inheriting my house to solve your problems. Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper. Sarah, why didn't you just tell me you were having financial trouble? I would have helped you. Because I was too proud. Because I wanted you to think I had everything under control. Because I'm 35 years old and I shouldn't need my mother to bail me out of my own poor decisions. I squeezed her hand. Honey, family helps family, that's what we do. But there's a difference between asking for help and planning to take what you need without permission. I know that now. Sarah finished her coffee and looked around my new kitchen. This place is really nice, Mom. It suits you. Thank you, I'm happy here. Are you lonely? Living by yourself in a new neighborhood? A little, sometimes. But I'm making friends. Mrs. Chen next door brought me a casserole yesterday, and the man across the street helped me set up my bird feeder. That's good. That's really good. Sarah stood up to leave, then paused at the door. Mom, is there any chance? Do you think maybe we could start over? I mean, I know I can't undo what Mike and I were planning, and I know you can't undo what you did with the money, but maybe we could just try to have a normal mother-daughter relationship again? I'd like that, I said. But it has to be different this time. No more trying to manage my life or make decisions for me. I promise. I'll try my best anyway. After Sarah left, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe we really could repair our relationship. Maybe something good could come out of all this pain and anger. But that feeling only lasted until Monday morning, when Mrs. Peterson called with some very interesting news. Dorothy, you'll never guess what I heard at the grocery store, she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. What's that, Gladys? I ran into Janet Walsh. You know, she works at First National Bank where Mike works. Well, used to work. My stomach dropped. Used to work? Oh, yes, dear. Apparently Mike was let go on Friday. Something about irregularities in some loan applications he'd been handling. Janet said there might even be criminal charges. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. Criminal charges? That's what she heard. Apparently Mike had been approving loans for people who didn't really qualify. And then getting kickbacks from some kind of real estate scheme. The FBI is investigating. My mind was racing. If Mike had been doing something illegal at the bank, if he was facing criminal charges, then their financial problems were much worse than Sarah had let on. No wonder they'd been so desperate to get their hands on my house money. Gladys, are you sure about this? Well, you know how gossip goes around this town, but Janet seemed pretty certain. She said the whole bank is buzzing about it. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen trying to process this new information. Sarah had told me they were having some financial trouble, but she'd made it sound like normal belt tightening, not a criminal investigation. Part of me felt vindicated. If Mike really had been involved in some kind of fraud scheme, then my instincts about him had been right all along. But mostly, I felt worried about Sarah. If her husband was facing criminal charges, she was going to need support, not judgment. I was still thinking about all this when my doorbell rang that afternoon. I opened the door to find Mike standing on my front porch, and he looked terrible. His clothes were disheveled, his hair was messy, and his eyes had the desperate look of someone who'd been backed into a corner. "Dorothy, we need to talk," he said. "Come in," I said, though every instinct told me I should be careful. Mike paced around my living room like a caged animal. "I guess you've heard by now." "Heard what?" "About the bank, about what happened with my job." "I heard you were let go." Mike laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let go, that's one way to put it. More like thrown out on my ass and handed over to the FBI. I sat down in my armchair and gestured for him to sit on the couch, but he kept pacing. "Mike, what exactly is going on?" "I made some mistakes. Some big mistakes. I got involved with some people I shouldn't have gotten involved with, and I approved some loans that I shouldn't have approved." "What kind of loans?" "Real estate loans for properties that were overvalued. I got a cut of each deal, and I used that money to cover some of our expenses." I felt sick to my stomach. "You were taking bribes?" "I was trying to keep my family afloat." His voice was getting louder. "Do you know what it's like to work at a bank, to be surrounded by money all day, and still not have enough to pay your own bills?" "So you decided to steal?" "I decided to take opportunities that were offered to me, but now the whole scheme has fallen apart, and the FBI is treating everyone involved like we're some kind of organized crime family." Mike finally sat down, but he was perched on the edge of the couch like he might bolt at any moment. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "About 2 years, maybe a little longer." 2 years. That meant Mike had been taking illegal money while he and Sarah were pressuring me to sell my house. They'd been planning to supplement their criminal income with my inheritance. "Does Sarah know?" Mike's face went even paler. "She knows I lost my job, but she doesn't know why. She doesn't know about the investigation." "You have to tell her." "I can't. It would destroy her." "Mike, she's going to find out anyway. These things don't stay secret." "Maybe. Maybe not. The FBI said if I cooperate, if I help them build their case against the main players, they might be willing to work out a deal." I stared at him, trying to understand what he was really saying. "What kind of deal?" "Reduced charges. Maybe probation instead of prison time." "Prison time?" Mike put his head in his hands. "Dorothy, then I could go to jail for 5 to 10 years. We could lose our house, our car, everything. Sarah could lose her job if this becomes public." Now I understood why he was here, why he'd come to see me instead of talking to Sarah about their problems. "You want the money back," I said. He looked up at me with something like hope in his eyes. "If there was any way you could help us, just temporarily, just until this all gets sorted out. Mike, I told you. I donated that money to charity. It's gone." "But you must have other savings. You bought this place with cash, right? You must have more put away." "What I have or don't have is none of your business." Mike stood up and started pacing again. "Dorothy, you don't understand. If I go to prison, Sarah will be left with nothing. No income, no savings, debts she doesn't even know about. Is that what you want? Do you want to destroy your own daughter's life just to prove a point?" I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something in Mike's voice, something desperate and dangerous that I'd never heard before. "I'm not destroying anyone's life. You did that all by yourself. I made mistakes, but you made them worse. If you hadn't given away all that money, we could have weathered this. We could have paid for lawyers, maybe even paid back some of what I took. So this is my fault? You knew we were counting on that inheritance. I knew you were planning to put me in a nursing home so you could steal my house." Mike stopped pacing and turned to face me. "It wasn't stealing. It would have been yours eventually anyway." Eventually meaning after I died. But you didn't want to wait for me to die naturally, did you? You wanted me out of the way sooner. Something shifted in Mike's expression, something that made me very uncomfortable. "You know what, Dorothy? Maybe that wouldn't have been such a bad thing. Maybe everyone would have been better off if you'd just gone quietly into that nursing home and let us handle your affairs." The room got very quiet. I could hear my heart beating in my chest. "I think you should leave now," I said. "I'm not leaving until we figure out how to fix this mess." "There's nothing to figure out. You committed crimes and now you're facing the consequences." Mike took a step toward me and I instinctively gripped the arms of my chair. "Dorothy, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have any money left that could help us through this? And I'm going to tell you one more time. What I have is none of your business." Mike's face was red now, and there was something wild in his eyes. "You selfish old woman. You'd rather see your own daughter destroyed than admit you made a mistake. Get out of my house. Not until you listen to me. Not until you understand what you've done." That's when I realized Mike wasn't just desperate. He was dangerous, and I was alone in my house with him, with no neighbors close enough to hear me if I screamed. Mike took another step toward me, and I could see the desperation in his eyes turning into something much darker. My hand moved slowly toward the phone on the side table, but he noticed the movement. "Don't even think about it," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Mike, you need to calm down and think about what you're doing." "What I'm doing? What I'm doing is trying to save my family from complete destruction, while you sit there acting like some kind of saint." He was close enough now that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He'd been drinking before he came here. "Threatening me isn't going to solve your problems." "Maybe not. But it might make me feel better." That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a key turning in my front door. "Mom, are you home? I brought groceries," Sarah's voice called out from the entryway. Mike's face went white. He stepped back from me quickly, running his hands through his hair and trying to compose himself. "In here, honey," I called, my voice surprisingly steady. Sarah appeared in the living room doorway carrying 2 bags of groceries, and she immediately sensed something was wrong. Her eyes moved from my face to Mike's, taking in the tension in the room. "What's going on?" she asked. "Your husband and I were just having a discussion about his recent career change," I said. Sarah set down the groceries and looked at Mike more carefully. "You told her about losing your job?" Mike opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see him calculating whether to tell the truth or try to maintain his lies. "He told me about losing his job," I said. "But he left out the part about the FBI investigation." Sarah's face went completely pale. "What FBI investigation?" Mike shot me a look of pure hatred, but there was no going back now. "Sarah, I was going to tell you, but I wanted to wait until I knew more about what was going to happen." "Tell me what?" "I made some mistakes at the bank, some bad decisions about loan approvals. They're investigating everyone involved." Sarah sat down heavily on the couch. "What kind of mistakes?" Mike looked at me again, silently pleading for me to keep quiet about the details. But I'd protected him enough. "He was taking bribes," I said, "approving fraudulent loans in exchange for kickbacks." "That's not—" "It wasn't—" Mike started, but Sarah held up her hand to stop him. Is that true? She asked him. Mike's shoulders sagged. It's more complicated than that. Is it true? Yes, he whispered. Sarah put her head in her hands. Oh my God. How long? About 2 years. 2 years? Sarah's voice was getting higher. You've been committing crimes for 2 years and you didn't tell me? I was trying to provide for us. Your mother wasn't the only one with financial problems. We were drowning, Sarah. The mortgage, the credit cards, your student loans from when you went back to school. I was just trying to keep us afloat. Sarah looked up at him with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. By stealing? By taking opportunities that were offered to me. By criminals. By people who understood how the system really works. I watched this conversation unfold with a mixture of sadness and relief. Sarah was finally seeing her husband for who he really was, but it was destroying her in the process. How much trouble are you in? She asked. Mike sat down next to her, but she moved away from him. If I cooperate with the investigation, they might be willing to work out a deal. Maybe probation instead of prison time. Prison time? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. It might not come to that, but it might. Yes. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, staring out at my backyard. This is why you were so desperate about Mom's house, isn't it? You needed that money to cover up what you'd done. I needed that money to help us survive what's coming. What's coming is what you brought on yourself. Sarah spun around to face him. Don't you dare try to blame this on anyone else. Don't you dare try to make this Mom's fault for not giving you money to clean up your mess. Mike looked at me again, and I could see him weighing whether to tell Sarah about his threats, about how close he'd come to getting physical with me. Your husband seems to think I'm selfish for not helping you out of this situation, I said carefully. Sarah's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? He came here asking me to give you money to pay for lawyers, and maybe even pay back some of what he stole. You asked my mother for money? Sarah's voice was getting dangerous now. I was exploring options, Mike said defensively. You were exploring options, Mike? She just gave away almost $1 million to charity. What did you think she was going to say? I thought maybe she'd care more about her daughter than about a bunch of strangers. That was the wrong thing to say. Sarah's face went from pale to flushed in an instant. Care about her daughter whose husband has been lying to her for 2 years? Her daughter who tried to have her put in a nursing home so she could steal her house? We weren't going to steal it. What would you call it then? Mike couldn't answer that question, and the silence stretched out between them like a chasm. Sarah turned to me. Mom, I am so sorry. I'm sorry for everything we put you through. And I'm sorry for bringing this man into your life. Sarah, don't say things you'll regret, Mike warned. Regret? The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really are sooner. She picked up her purse from the coffee table. I'm going to stay with my friend Lisa tonight. Maybe longer. I need time to think about what I want to do. Sarah, wait, Mike said, standing up. We can work through this. We're a team. A team? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Teams don't lie to each other for 2 years. Teams don't commit crimes behind each other's backs. Teams don't threaten elderly women when they don't get what they want. Mike's face went white. I didn't threaten anyone. Sarah looked at me. Is that true, Mom? I could have protected Mike. I could have kept quiet about what had happened before Sarah arrived, but I'd learned my lesson about keeping dangerous secrets. He was very upset when I told him I couldn't help financially, I said carefully. He got quite close to me, and his tone became rather threatening. I was just frustrated, Mike protested. You threatened my mother? Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. It wasn't like that. Get out, Sarah said. Sarah, please, just listen to me. Get out of my mother's house right now before I call the police. Mike looked from Sarah to me and back again. He seemed to realize that he'd lost any chance of getting what he came for. Fine, he said. "But don't come crawling back to me when you realize what you're giving up. Don't expect me to be there when this all falls apart." "I wouldn't expect anything from you ever again," Sarah said. Mike stormed out, slamming the front door behind him. Sarah and I stood in my living room listening to his car start up and drive away. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked me. "I'm fine. But are you okay?" Sarah sat down on the couch and started crying. Not the angry tears from a few minutes ago, but deep, heartbroken sobs that shook her whole body. I sat down next to her and put my arms around her, holding her the way I used to when she was little and had scraped her knee or lost a toy. "I'm so stupid," she said through her tears. "How did I not see this? How did I live with him for 10 years and not know he was capable of this?" "Because you trusted him, because you loved him. That's not stupid. That's human." "But I should have known. There were signs. Times when he had extra money he couldn't explain. Times when he was secretive about work calls. I just told myself I was being paranoid." "Honey, you can't blame yourself for someone else's choices." Sarah pulled back to look at me. "Is that what you told yourself when I was trying to control your life? That it wasn't your fault?" I smiled sadly. "I told myself a lot of things. Mostly I told myself that you meant well, even when you were going about it all wrong." "I did mean well, but meaning well doesn't excuse what I did to you." "No, it doesn't. But it's a place we can start from." Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box on my coffee table. "What am I going to do, Mom? If Mike goes to prison, I'll lose the house. I can't afford the mortgage on my salary alone, especially with all the credit card debt he mentioned." "You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you know." "But what if I'm not? What if I end up losing everything and having to start over at 35 with nothing?" I took her hands in mine. "Then you'll start over, and you won't be alone." "You'd help me? After everything I did to you? Sarah, you're my daughter. I don't stop loving you just because you make mistakes, even big ones." She started crying again, but these were different tears. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "I don't deserve your help. Love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to care for someone, even when they mess up." We sat together for a long time, not talking, just being mother and daughter again in a way we hadn't been for months. Finally, Sarah looked up at me. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Giving away all that money?" I thought about it seriously. "No. I gave it to causes that matter to me, and it's helping people who really need help. That feels good. Even knowing what it would have meant to me, to us, especially knowing what it would have meant to you, Sarah, that money would have been a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem. It would have helped Mike cover up his crimes, helped you maintain a lifestyle you couldn't afford, and prevented both of you from dealing with the real issues in your lives." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're right. It would have just enabled us to keep making the same mistakes. And more importantly, you would have gotten that money by putting me somewhere I didn't want to be. That's not a foundation you'd want to build your future on." "No, it's not." Sarah stayed for dinner, and we talked more honestly than we had in years. She told me about her job, her friends, her dreams for the future that had nothing to do with inheritance money or fancy condos. I told her about my new neighbors, my plans for the garden, the peace I'd found in my little cottage. When she was getting ready to leave, she hugged me tightly at the door. "Mom, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the daughter you deserve." "You already are that daughter, I said. "You just lost your way for a while." 6 months later, Sarah filed for divorce. Mike pled guilty to bank fraud and was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Sarah lost the house, but she found a small apartment across town that she could afford on her own. She came to visit me every Sunday, and we'd sit on my front porch drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood kids play in the street. She never once mentioned the money I'd given away or ask me for financial help. Instead, she started volunteering at the food bank where some of my donation had gone. She said it helped her understand what I'd been trying to teach her about using resources to help people who really needed help. One Sunday in October, as we were watching the leaves change colors on the oak trees, Sarah said something that made my heart full. "You know, Mom, I think you did more than teach me a lesson when you sold the house. I think you saved my life." "How's that?" "If you hadn't done what you did, I would have stayed married to Mike. I would have kept making excuses for him, kept believing his lies, kept thinking that having money would solve all our problems. I would have wasted years of my life with someone who didn't respect me or anyone else. And now? Now I'm learning who I really am when I'm not trying to control everyone around me. And you know what? I kind of like her." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I like her too." As the sun set over my new neighborhood, I reflected on everything that had happened. The pain, the anger, the betrayal, the confrontations. All of it had been necessary to get us to this place. I'd lost almost $1 million, but I'd gained something much more valuable. A daughter who finally understood the difference between loving someone and controlling them. Sarah had lost her house, her husband, and her financial security, but she'd found her self-respect and learned to build a life based on her own choices rather than other people's money. And Mike? Well, Mike had learned that actions have consequences, even when you think no one is watching. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst impulses, even when that refusal causes them pain. Sometimes saving someone means letting them fall far enough to understand how they got there. I thought about the money again, the scholarships that would help young people get educations, the medical equipment that would help sick people get better, the food that would feed hungry families. Every dollar was working to make the world a little bit better. That night, as I got ready for bed in my cozy cottage, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished. Not just the lesson I'd taught Sarah and Mike, but the way I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most. I'd proven that being old doesn't mean being powerless, that being someone's mother doesn't mean sacrificing your own dignity, and that sometimes the most generous thing you can do with money is give it to people who will use it to help others instead of themselves. The next morning, I woke up to find a note that had been slipped under my front door. It was from Emma Henderson, the 6-year-old who now lived in my old house. The note was written in crayon and said, "Thank you for letting us live in your house. We love it very much. The garden is beautiful." I smiled and put the note on my refrigerator, right next to a photo of Sarah and me from our last Sunday visit, both reminders of the same truth. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you give freely without expecting anything in return. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.